name is Alex Sturgeon, and on today's episode of History on the Hooch, we will be picking up right where we left off last week, in discussion on Mr. William H. Young. Mr. William H. Young was personally responsible for the founding of the mill industry here in Columbus. He was involved in the Civil War, and he was also involved in founding the CB&T Bank, which would later develop into Synovus.
Welcome back to History on the Hooch. I'm Dr. Rick Gardiner, and Alex Sturgeon is to my left, and Mackenzie O'Keefe to my right. How you guys doing today?
Doing really good.
Doing great.
Welcome back. Now, we've been highlighting this year on our program the Civil War sesquicentennial. Alex, you remind us what the sesquicentennial is?
Yes, I would love to. The
It's hard to say, isn't it?
It is. It's possible to say.
Sesquicentennial.
It is essentially a very big word for the 150th anniversary of the Civil War.
Excellent. And we're sponsored by the Ivy Center for the Cultural Approach to History. Mackenzie, could you remind us what the cultural approach to history involves?
Absolutely, Dr. Gardner. So the cultural approach to history is an approach where we look at history not based just on the large events and the headline events and things of that nature, but we focus on the common experience and in the economic, entertainment, arts, etc. So we use all of those to create what we call a more cultural approach to history, or a composite approach.
All right. Now, you guys are both in a social studies methods class right now at Columbus State, correct?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
You like that class?
I love it. It's easily one of my favorite classes I've ever taken at CSU.
Thank you. I enjoy it.
Yeah, we have a great teacher.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Well, one of the things that you've been learning in that class is about student-centered approaches and constructivism. How does that relate to what we're doing here on History on the Hooch?
Well, constructivism is basically, like you said, a student-centered thing. And we're doing here on History on the Hooch a lot of living history is what we like to call it. And with doing that, we get to kind of look at a event in history and study it, and give our own perspective and take and kind of act it out and give a different perspective on it.
Well, how do you think that helps students learn and as they participate in these kinds of events?
Well, I think that students learn the best when they're hands-on, when they actually get to do things. And when you get to live history by doing role plays or reenactments and things of that nature, I think it helps two things. I think, A, it helps you to understand the humanity aspect of history, but it also helps you retain the history because you remember things that you do throughout life a lot better than you do just reading in a book.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, last week we focused particularly on William H. Young of Columbus and his connection to the Confederate gold that was here for some time and then mysteriously is vanished.
Yes.
And today we're going to continue talking about Mr. William H. Young. We read in his obituary from the New Orleans Times that he was called the father of cotton manufacturing in the South. So we want to tell that story today, and as it relates to Mr. William H. Young. And Alex, you got a chance to interview Mr. William H. Young, or his ghost, I guess,
Yes.
down by the river.
Yes, I did. Let's take a look at it.
Let's take a look.
Here we are today on the banks of the Chattahoochee River, next to the Coweta Falls. We're here today with Mr. William H. Young, founder of the Eagle and Phoenix Mill and president of the Bank of Columbus. How are you, Mr. Young?
I'm well, Alex. Thank you very much.
Awesome. When did you come here, Mr. Young?
Alex, I first came here when I was about 19 years old. I was born in 1807 in New York, and in 1826, it was about 19 or 20, I first came to this section of the river at that time.
Okay, great. What did you first see when you got here?
Well, Alex, when I first came, there wasn't a city here. It was wild country, and I looked across the river, and I saw 1,000 Indians of the Creek tribe on what is now the Alabama side of the river.
Wow, that is great. And so, what was your vision after you saw all this for Columbus?
Well, Alex, what impressed me the most about this water was the immense power that could be generated here at these falls, that could power mills, that could create manufacturing. And right then and there in 1826, I dedicated myself that if I ever had the opportunity to come here, that I would build a mill and use the water power to provide manufacturing in a way that no one has ever done.
Wow, Alex, what a great interview with Mr. William H. Young. That's amazing.
It was a lot of fun.
Well, we learned a lot of things. We learned that Mr. William H. Young didn't come to Columbus until the 1850s. But what happened in 1861 that changed his life?
Well, Georgia seceded from the United States. And William H. Young used all of his efforts as a bank president and as a factory owner toward the war effort. And from one of his letters in February of 1862, we found that he considered himself a close friend to Chris Meminger, who was the Secretary of the Treasury of the Confederate States government. And then we know that his son, who was 15 years of age in 1860, according to the census, signed up with the 31st Georgia under Pleasant Phillips, General Pleasant Phillips, and he went off to battle at that time. And you continued an interview with Mr. Young down by the river.
I did, yeah.
Can we go back?
I would love to. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Now, Mr. Young, shortly after your construction of the Eagle Phoenix Mill, the Civil War broke out. Is that correct?
Well, Alex, actually, before the Civil War, we were just called the Eagle Mill, and that is correct. The war broke out maybe just a half a dozen years or so after we finished our construction.
Oh. So what exactly was your participation in the war?
Good question, Alex. I would say my most honorable participation was that my son, he was 16 when he enlisted in 1861 in the 31st Georgia. He gave his all for this cause, and it was a great loss to me to lose my son.
I'm so sorry for your loss. Is there anything else you participated in as far as your involvement in the war?
Well, I was honored. They named one of the CSA boats that came up the Chattahoochee was named the William H. Young boat. I was very proud of that.
Wow. And if I remember correctly, you were the president of the Bank of Columbus here.
I was, Alex, and to my surprise, 1 year after the war began, I was told that I was to be the steward, the protector of about $2.5 million worth of gold and silver that had shipped here from New Orleans for safekeeping. And the Confederate government told me that I was to be the one to protect that gold at the first bank. Also, we call it sometimes the Iron Bank. It's a building constructed entirely of iron.
Wow. Wow. And how successful were you in your protection of the gold?
Well, to my surprise, October of 1862, a gentleman showed up at the bank. He was dressed in a Confederate outfit, and he claimed to be from General Beauregard's headquarters in Charleston, and he demanded the gold. Well, of course, I didn't yield that gold to him at that time.
Sir, I'm a representative of General Beauregard, and he himself is a representative of the Confederate States of America as well. So therefore, sir, I am a representative of the Confederate States of America.
Sir, we have probably a dozen captains running around the streets of Columbus. Do you think anyone can come in here and say they're a representative of the government and take $2 million, $3 million in gold bullion? It ain't going to happen.
Now, Mr. Young, you told us about the gold. Did you participate in any other ways during the war?
Well, Alex, as the war came to a close, I was quite aware that the Yankee Army was on its way to Columbus to destroy and burn and pillage. And so I did everything I could. I came to this spot here on the Chattahoochee, got a number of my operatives, and we threw as much of our mill machinery as we possibly could into the Chattahoochee so that Wilson's raiders of the Yankee Army would not confiscate it, destroy it, burn it. And thankfully we were somewhat successful at preserving a good bit of our mill machinery. But he did in fact burn the mills.
Wow. So all of your mills were burned down. What would you do after that?
Well, I think he came in with some sense that that he was going to find that gold here. And because I had been working around mills for so many years, I had gone nearly deaf. And as I am even now, it's hard for me to hear you. And every time that a soldier pointed a gun at me and told me to put my hands up and stop, I couldn't hear. And I was shot severely in my body 6 times that Easter night, 1860.
And miraculously, and I bear on my body 6 wounds from that last battle of the Civil War that took place here in France.
Now, after the war, we know that Andrew Johnson, after Lincoln was killed and Andrew Johnson became president, that Andrew Johnson offered a pardon to most Southerners if they would just take the oath of allegiance to the United States. But in that pardon, the general pardon, he excluded the leaders of the rebellion, those who had a bigger part. Now, was William H. Young, was he excluded from the pardon? Do you know, Mackenzie?
Actually, he was excluded from the pardon, the general pardon, because he was a steward for the Confederate gold. He was also a principal financer for the war, so he kind of invited persecution from the federal government on those counts.
So what did he do?
Well, he actually wrote the President Johnson, for a pardon. And basically what he said is that, you know, I took part in the last battle of the Civil War. I was shot 6 times due to some incidents, and he was actually, according to his obituary, he was shot in what is now known as the location of what is now known as the Cannon Brew Pub.
Ah,
interesting.
We've been there before.
We have been there, yes.
So did Andrew Johnson give him a pardon?
Yes, he did get the pardon.
Whereas William H. Young of Columbus, Georgia, by taking part in the late rebellion against the government of the United States, has made himself liable to heavy pains and penalties. I, Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, in consideration of the premises, diverse other good and sufficient reasoning me thereunto moving, do hereby grant to the said William H. Young a full pardon and amnesty for all offenses committed arising from participation in the said rebellion.
So the president pardoned William H. Young, and what happened after the pardon?
Well, after he was pardoned, he still resided in Columbus, and so he dedicated himself to rebuilding his mill. Now, previously, his mill was named just simply the Eagle Mill. But as he rebuilt, he gave it a new name and began calling it the Eagle and Phoenix Mill.
Why did he add Phoenix to the name? Do you know, Alex?
Well, as many people may or may not know, the phoenix is this mythological creature, which is a bird that essentially is, once it dies, it resurrects itself out of the ashes of itself and becomes a new bird, and which was a very appropriate title for the mill after it was burned down during the Battle of Columbus.
There's a statue downtown.
There is.
That looks a little bit like that. It's a phoenix bird.
Yes,
right
it is.
in front of the CSU dormitory there.
Yes, there is.
I see. Now, many of the workers for the Eagle and Phoenix Mill lived on the Alabama side of the river, and that had previously been called Girard and Brownsville, but it took on a new name at that point. I think they called it initially Phoenix Village, and then eventually Phoenix City.
Wow, so then Mr. William H. Young is indirectly the person who gave Phoenix City its name then.
I guess we could say that, right. He came up with the name Eagle and Phoenix, which led to Phoenix City.
So then why did he misspell it and leave out an O?
This is a controversy and a mystery to some degree. There's quite a few theories, legends perhaps. The one that I hear quite often is that the post office in Washington, D.C. got frustrated sending mail that was supposed to go to Arizona to Alabama or vice versa, and they insisted that the Alabamians rename their city to. I think that's probably an urban legend. I haven't seen a whole lot of evidence to that effect. I think that when we look at the newspapers even from 1866 when the name was made, we see in some of the newspapers that it's actually spelled with a diphthong. It's two vowels that are connected to each other, like you see in this newspaper on the screen just now. It's the Eagle and Phoenix. You see the O and the E kind of jammed together. Mm-hmm. It's called a diphthong. And I suppose if you don't have one of those on your typewriter, you choose one or the other. And as far as what it sounds like, it doesn't sound like phonics. It sounds like Phoenix and E. So even in the 1866, we see it spelled this way. We see it spelled with the O and the E separate. And we also see it spelled with just an E.
Wow.
But why it actually turned out that way, I don't think anybody has ever solved that mystery entirely.
No.
Interesting.
Next on History on the Hooch, when we come back, we're going to look at one of the events that took place at the Eagle and Phoenix Mill that led to the establishment of a couple of very important institutions in Columbus. And looking forward to that. We'll be right back on History on the Hooch. Welcome back to History on the Hooch. I'm Dr. Gardiner, and Alex Sturgeon is with us, and Mackenzie O'Keefe. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, we've been covering William H. Young and his many dramas here in Columbus, and after the war, we know he began to rebuild his mill. It was called the Eagle Mill, and he renamed it. What was it called in the rename?
The Eagle and Phoenix Mill.
The Eagle and Phoenix Mill, and there were three buildings. The first one, number 1, and then building number 2, and the one that we know today, the large Eagle and Phoenix Mill, is building number 3. And here's an old postcard. Let's take a look at this. There's an old postcard of the Eagle and Phoenix Mill about this time, and what do you make of that, Alex? What does it say?
The postcard says, largest cotton mill in the world, the Eagle and Phoenix, Columbus, Georgia.
Largest cotton mill in the world. Mackenzie, was this the largest cotton mill in the world at any time?
Well, Dr. Gardner, largest is sort of a ambiguous term in that the postcard doesn't state, is it the largest in the number of employees? Is it the largest in output? Is it simply the largest in structure, height, wide, etc.? It doesn't say. What we do know is that during this time in England and New England as well, there were very large mills being built. So perhaps for a time, the Eagle and Phoenix Mill here in Columbus may have been the largest in the world, but there's just nothing to sustain that claim.
I kind of think it's a little bit of a stretch. What do you think, Alex?
I say so as well.
I don't know. Well, who worked in the Eagle and Phoenix Mill?
Well, Dr. Gardner, a lot of people worked in the Eagle and Phoenix Mill, and a very diverse population. We had men working, of course, but we also had the introduction of women into the workforce. We had whites, blacks, children even worked in the mills.
Wow. And we found some research about a story that of a female mill worker who did something that caused another institution to be born.
Very, very true. That was the case. In this particular situation, with the introduction of women more forcibly into the working society, a lot of them were single mothers. Some of them were also women of marrying age that perhaps hadn't quite found a husband yet, but had entered the workforce and started to make money. So the issue was, what do we do now? Because you got to remember, during this time, these women are living in boarding houses over on the Alabama side, which we now know as Phoenix City. They're all living in cramped spaces, you know, everybody's living together, and so they have to figure out, what are we going to do with our assets? And so it's interesting how they come up with a solution for that problem.
And we did a little living history about the mishap that occurred, and let's take a look at what our interpretation of the primary sources that from the 1880s.
What's wrong?
I'm stuck.
What happened?
I don't know, but I'm stuck. Help me.
Okay. I got you. Don't worry. I got it. Don't worry. Man, where'd all this money come from?
It's my life savings.
Where was it? Was it in your dress?
It's sewn in my dress like everybody else.
Why was it in your dress?
Because I can't leave it in my trunk. Somebody will steal it. It's okay. I got it. Thank you.
Tell me, what's going on over
Oh, Mr. Young, thank goodness you're here. She got her dress stuck and we cut it and a lot of money fell out.
Money?
I'm
Stand up, Miss.
I'm sorry.
What happened to your dress?
Well, I was working and it got caught, and I called for Mr. Jordan and he cut it, but he cut through where I had sewed my life savings into my dress.
Why did you put your money, all those greenbacks, in that dress?
Well, everybody does it. I can't leave it in my trunk because somebody will steal it. And I've worked all my life for this.
This is so sad. I have an idea. How about this? If you will keep your money in the safe here, I will make sure it's protected for you. And I will pay you interest on the money that you keep with us. How does that sound?
Really? Mr. Young, you would do that for me?
I will do it for you and for others. Do you think any of your other friends are doing this kind of thing?
Oh, well, Mr. Young, all of my friends are doing it.
We need to start a factory bank.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Young. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, let me get a deposit for you. It's in the company safe. And you'll earn some money on it every year.
Thank you so much.
That was pretty cool. Wow. So now the bank, the factory bank that's mentioned in that reenactment, what did that become?
So it became a really popular bank here in Columbus that we know of, named CB&T, Columbus Bank and Trust.
Yes, and which also led to the formation of Synovus as well. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, now tell me a little bit about doing that living history there. When was it, where was that filmed?
So the living history this week was filmed at actually on site at Eagle in Phoenix, but it's no longer a mill, it's now loft apartments. But it is the original building, so it was really entertaining to see the original building. And we filmed in the entryway to the loft apartments, which has really high ceilings and brick and things of that nature. And they've set up a museum of sorts where they have, old gears on the walls and different pieces of equipment sitting around in the atrium. So it's really interesting.
So likely in the building where the event actually took place.
Most definitely.
Now, we ran into some challenges this week, on Monday, I think.
Yes.
Tell us about that,
yes.
Alex, some of the challenges.
The rain weather was not cooperating with us
That's
in the
why
morning.
You're all wet.
That is why my hair looks like I have 10 pounds of gel in it across the top of it.
Right.
It was definitely challenging, but we made it work. And sometimes you just gotta work with it.
And tell us about shooting the dress film there.
Oh my goodness. So the dress. So first of all, we're shooting, like I said, in the entryway to the apartment complex. And because of the high ceilings, everything we utter, even at a low volume, echoes and just carries the voice throughout the apartment complex. And so I'm trying to scream and freak out because my dress is caught, and at the same time I'm worried about people coming out and trying to help somebody who's obviously calling for help. And so we're dealing with that, not to mention the fact that for this shot we have one dress. We have one dress. We have one chance to make this shot work, and thank goodness we got it done one take. The money fell out the way it was supposed to. The dress got cut the way it was supposed to. And thank goodness we made it work this week, but it was definitely challenging.
Now, Columbus State, a Columbus State professor was commissioned to do a piece of artwork, I think a sculpture about this particular event.
That's right. It's actually a statue. It's still there downtown on Broadway in the CB&T courtyard.
Oh, let's take a look at the statue.
We're here in the courtyard at CB&T in downtown Columbus, viewing a statue entitled "A Simple Act of Kindness." This statue depicts the mishap that occurred at the Eagle and Phoenix mill that resulted in the foundation of CB&T. The statue was commissioned in 2006 to a Mr. George Goddard, who was a Columbus State University professor for many years. In this depiction of the mishap at the mill, the young woman's dress is caught in a piece of machinery. As the dress continues to rip, her life savings falls to the floor. However, we have a differing story from Mr. William H. Young himself. In a testimony given to the United States Senate, Mr. Young recounts the story as the young woman's dress being caught in a piece of machinery, and a superintendent comes over to cut her dress from the machinery. As he cuts her dress, he cuts through her life savings, which it then scatters on the floor of the mill.
So the story that William H. Young told and the statue don't really line up. Is that right?
That's correct, Dr. Gardiner. So what we have is a difference of interpretation, I think. For the statue, very obviously, you see pictured just the woman being caught and the money falling. However, as the video explained, in Mr. Young's interpretation, a superintendent actually cut through her life savings in the dress as it fell to the floor when she was stuck. So the difference of interpretation, I think, probably stems from maybe just not having access to the documents that we now have access to, because we find a lot when we're doing research and we get things out of the archives that a lot of things are just sitting in people's attics that have been there for years and years and years, and all of a sudden we now have this new interpretation and this new documentation to back up said claims. The other thing that may have happened is the artist simply, chose to express the story in that way, and that's the beautiful thing about history, is that you can take different aspects and express them in different ways.
Nonetheless, William H. Young was a very important person in the history of the Chattahoochee Valley, it seems like.
Most definitely.
Yes.
Can you review some of the things that he was involved with?
Yes. He was involved in a number of things here in Columbus. It's actually incredible the things that he's not really that much known for. His involvement in the Battle of Columbus, him being a major financer of the war, being the president of the Bank of Columbus, starting the cotton mill and mill industry here in Columbus. The list goes on of some of the things he's done. And
well, not to mention, Alex, just like we were talking about last week, his involvement with the lost Confederate gold. Who would have known that, Young would have played such an important role here in Columbus and founded CB&T and Synovus, which are things that still hang around today for us.
Yeah.
Do you bank at CB&T?
I do. I do.
All right.
Yeah.
So you have that mill worker to thank for
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Young.
What's on tap next week for History on the Hooch?
So next week we're going to start looking at the beginning stages of the Battle of Columbus. We're going to look at why the Yankees decided that Columbus should be a target and why they concentrated some efforts. And we're also going to explore why Columbus is called the last land battle of the Civil War.
So things like, I imagine we'll be looking at the naval yard, the construction of ironclads, and the Heyman sword factory, and the guns that were made here, the cannons that were made here. Perhaps the concern that there's $2.5 million of gold still here, and that this is sort of the door to Georgia, to Andersonville and Henry Wirz, and as we eventually find out, the capture of Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, captured by the same men who came through Columbus.
That's correct.
Hey, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I hope you guys are as well.
It's going to be very exciting.
Very exciting.
Join us next time on History on the Hooch.